Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, we'll have a lot of fun learning about two bishops, how powerful two bishops can be when they work together in trying to checkmate the enemy king. Let me show you right away what does a typical Boden's mate look like. Here we go. White has two bishops and black has castled to the queen side of the board. We can see that even though the white bishop is far away on the dark squares on g3, it still restricts the black king moving to either b8 or c7. So therefore, if the other bishop would be able to attack the black king as well as the b7 square, then all three squares where potentially the black king could move to would be controlled. So the answer is simple, moving the bishop to a6. This obviously attacks the black king, and as we mentioned a moment ago, the dark squares b8 and c7 are controlled by the other bishop. Now that we know what a Boden's mate looks like, we'll see some positions, some combinations that we'll try to get to it. It won't be a one-move, easy solution, but it will take at least two, sometimes even more moves. Let's look at this position that we see on the screen right now. First of all, let's try to see who is ahead at the moment. Well, white has a queen, while black doesn't, but black has two rooks. Also, white has an extra bishop. So right now, white is a little bit ahead in material. However, we can also see that the black rook from c6 is attacking the white queen. And the tricky part is that that very queen from c2 is unable to go out of the rook's way. Why? Because if that queen would not be there, then the white king would be under attack. And as you know, based on the rules of chess, you can never ever make any move that would leave your king under attack. And yet, white can win this game. Normally, if white would lose the queen, even for the rook, that is, if the black rook captures the white queen and then the white king recaptures, in that scenario, for example, let's say white makes bishop b5 and rook takes and king takes, right now black would be clearly ahead, having an extra rook and pawn, while a bishop and a knight balance each other out. White has only a bishop. That would give black 3 points advantage on the number scale. Another option that white could try is to try to interpose and block the attack of the black rook towards the white queen. That move would be to move the bishop to c4. Now, if black would not have the pawn on d5 assisting the rook, then it may be an okay move. However, here, this would make things just worse, because the rook would just capture the bishop, still attacking and pinning the white queen. And of course, very importantly, if now queen takes rook, then the pawn from d5 would capture the white queen. So again, let's go back to our starting position and try to look for still a way for white to win. Now, as we know, the ultimate goal in chess is to checkmate the opponent's king. And if we know for sure we're about to give a checkmate, we don't need to hold back anything. Even if we lose our queen, or sometimes more than a queen and a rook, or two rooks, ultimately we'll win the game. And that's exactly what is happening now. White is giving the queen up in order to open up the a6 c8 diagonal. That is, queen takes rook, check. The only legal move black has is to capture the queen, and now white achieved the goal, opening up the diagonal, and just like in our first position, the bishop arrives on a6, announcing checkmate. Very nice. A very typical combination, a very typical pattern that I suggest you remember, and I'll bet you'll have opportunities at some point when you play games to use it to your advantage. Or, of course, just as importantly, making sure you avoid falling into such a trap. Let's move on to the next example. Here we go. Now the tables are turned. It is black's turn, not white. White at the moment is much ahead, having a second rook while black doesn't. Black only has a second bishop. So white is up 3 points, also having 5 pawns versus just 4. However, if black here finds the correct move, black can again force checkmate in just 2 moves, just like in the very last example. Again, if you notice, the white king has castled the queen side, just like in our first 2 examples, and black has a very powerful bishop pasting over the squares where the white king could move to if the black bishop wouldn't be there. By the way, another very important component to this type of Bowden mates is that the white pawn has already left the c2 square where it would normally be defending the white king. So therefore, black is already in good shape. The white king is unable to move. So all black needs to accomplish is to force this pawn from b2 to move out of the way so the other bishop can give checkmate on a3. Now, a very important comment. You may wonder what would happen if the black queen would move to a3 right now, with the idea and hope that white would capture, and then indeed black would give checkmate. However, it's extremely important to understand that when you make a move like that, it's not a forceful move, and in fact, would allow white to simply capture our beautiful bishop on f5 because white was not forced to move his b-pawn or take the sacrifice, the queen. On the other hand, if black finds the correct move, giving up the queen in a way where white has no choice but accept the sacrifice and open up the c1 a3 diagonal, then black will win. And that correct move is checking the white king from c3. Again, white has no other legal move but to capture the queen, and now black is ready for checkmate, bishop a3. Let's move on now and see a short little game where white uses this very same pattern to his advantage. Here we go. Game started with e4 and black played d5. This is called the center counter, or also called in Europe as the Scandinavian defense. It's not one of the most popular openings among masters or grandmasters because it typically forces the queen move out early, and generally, based on the opening principles, that's not a good thing. And it's not a good thing because white immediately gets to develop and at the same time attack the queen, delaying black's development. Now the queen needs to react to this attack and retreat. There are three popular moves in this position. One is to move to a5. Another one is more modern one to move to d6. At least doesn't retreat altogether, or of course retreating all the way to d8 as black chose in this very game. You may wonder, why wouldn't black give a check? Well, I have news for you. Giving a check is not an accomplishment in itself at all. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is that your opponent needs to react to it and is more limited in choices. But in this case, this would be making things just worse for black. White would be able to block the attack and then on the following move develop also the knight, again attacking the black queen. As I said, a queen is not supposed to be out this early wandering around because it will be attacked over and over. And as they say, a lone bird will not achieve anything. Let's go back and see how the game continued after queen retreated all the way to d8. White played knight f3, continuing, developing. And here I would suggest for black just to develop on the king's side and hurry up and castle to avoid a tragedy as what happened later in this game. Black moved the bishop out early and to an unprotected square. It's true, the bishop right now is spinning the knight. The knight better does not move because it will lose the queen on d1. However, white can continue in a better way and developed with the bishop. This is the first critical moment of the game. White now has a very serious threat. And for example, if black would respond by playing knight to d7, that would not defend against the threat. White could easily win a pawn by capturing on f7, sacrificing the bishop temporarily, another important pattern to remember. And then, if king takes bishop, then knight g5 check, followed by queen takes bishop. At the end of the day, white would have regained the sacrificed bishop, that is, even up the material balance, and if you count the pawns, you'll see that white has an extra one. So therefore, that's a pretty serious gain, and in addition, the black king, by moving to f7 and then back to e8, along the way, lost the right to castle. So therefore, this would be a very nice thing for white. Let's go back to the position and examine what would happen if instead the knight would go to f6, protecting the bishop on g4. Well, it's true that it protects the bishop. However, nevertheless, it would not solve black's problems. The same combination would come anyway with bishop takes, king takes, with the difference that now the check will not come from g5 like we saw in the previous variation, but it is coming from e5. Now, in addition to the queen attacking the bishop, so is the white knight from e5, and because it's a check, black needs to move out, then knight takes bishop, and again white ended up winning a pawn. Importantly, if knight takes knight, queen can take back, making sure white does not lose a piece. Again, let's go back. There is another option in addition to the game move that black could have tried here. For example, moving the bishop back to h5. Now, the big difference is that if white would try the same sacrifice, giving the bishop up on f7, then black, in addition to capturing the bishop with the king, in which case after knight e5, white would be ahead again, black would have the additional option to capturing back with the bishop, and then white indeed would be in trouble. However, white can do better. After bishop h5 in this position, white actually has a very elegant move. Try to figure out what that may be. And the beautiful move is moving the knight to e5. Hey, wait a minute. Didn't I say that the knight cannot move because then the queen is lost? Well, very true, I did. But here, white is setting up a trap. After knight e5, if now bishop takes queen, all of a sudden white is ready for giving a checkmate. The only time you don't mind to give up your most important, most valuable piece, the queen, is if either you're ready to checkmate or you're likely to win your opponent's queen or some other set of pieces that make up at least of equal value to the queen. Such as, for example, if you get 2 rooks, or you would get 2 knights and a bishop, or some other combination. Of course, after the knight moved to e5 in this position, black is not forced to capture the queen. Could, for example, develop the knight and protect the bishop. However, that would be a serious mistake because white would be ready to make a brilliant sacrifice by queen h5. That would be called removing the guard of the f7 square. If black now does not capture the queen, then white is just up a bishop. On the other hand, if they do, then the bishop will capture on f7, checkmate. Again, let's go back a bit. So, bishop h5, remember the move, what white should play after that? It is knight e5. The best black can do at this point is to retreat the bishop to g6. And now white is ready to play aggressively because black is much behind in development. As we can see, black already wasted 3 valuable moves with the bishop, while white is already developed with 3 different minor pieces. Therefore, white is ready to follow up on the attack and bring the queen out because it's immediately a fork by attacking the pawn on b7 as well as threatening to capture on f7. White is clearly better here. And now let's follow up and see what happened in the game between Teichmann and Dagover. Black responded in the game by playing e6, the smartest choice, neutralizing white's powerful bishop on c4. White played h3, attacking the bishop. And of course now black had the option to move back to h5, for example. It certainly would be my preferred choice, but black instead traded the bishop for a knight. In general, if you follow the opening principles, do not trade a bishop for a knight unless you have a very good reason. A very good reason may be if you're winning material or avoiding losing material. How should white recapture at this juncture, queen or pawn? You may wonder, Susan said, don't bring your queen out early. That's very true. However, unless there is an immediate punishment for it, moving a queen out early is a temporary problem. However, if instead you would capture back with the pawn, that would cause permanent damage to your position, ruining the pawn structure, doubling up pawns on the f-file, as well as taking away the potential safety of the white king on the king side. So naturally, the only correct choice is to capture back with the queen. Now, white didn't just recapture, but immediately created an attack over the b7 pawn. Black responded by interposing with the pawn, playing c6. White continues developing, opening the diagonal of the dark squared bishop. And black thought, since he's behind in development, let's try to trade queens. Well, what should white do? Should white accept the invitation? Definitely not. When you're ahead In development, you have the initiative. Your most valuable piece is your queen. You do not want to trade it off because it's the strongest attacking piece in chess. By exchanging queens right now, Black would have a much easier time in defending. Queen move to g3. A pretty tricky move, looking in both directions, looking on one hand to the king side, but also on the other hand towards c7. And here Black made a losing mistake by ignoring White's threat to enter on c7 and move the knight to h6. Generally speaking, moving the knight to the edge of the board is not a good thing. And here, the most ambitious and objectively best move for White was to play queen c7. That would be threatening the pawn on b7. And after queen e7, which would indirectly protect that pawn, White could play queen c8 check, when the only legal move Black has is to block, and then White would win the pawn anyway. White missed this opportunity and played the natural bishop g5. Black's queen moved to g6, and now White made a very tricky move, played knight b5. A typical example that just because your opponent offers you a piece, a sacrifice, it doesn't mean that you necessarily need to accept it. In this case, Black should have played knight f5 and would have been still in the game. Instead, Black made a blunder by capturing that knight. And now we already can see the Boden's idea, one bishop controlling squares around the king and the other bishop delivering the checkmate. It wouldn't be sufficient, however, to capture the pawn right away because Black would be ready to block. So instead, White first removes the defending piece by sacrificing the queen, a brilliant move. Check, and when rook captures, bishop captures pawn, checkmate. A very nice game. And now let's see the next position. Here we go. This position has happened also in another famous game between Lasker and England. In this position, it was White's turn. You can already see the pattern. Black has castle to the queen's side. White has a bishop controlling two key squares. And here there is another participant, namely the white rook. Why? Why is that important? Because Black does not have a knight on d7, taking away that escape square of the king. A very important idea, you always want to make sure that your combination works when you're sacrificing a queen, because there is no take back, there is no way back. So therefore, before you would go ahead and give up your queen, make sure the combination really works. Pawn takes back, and again the same checkmate, with the difference that now the white rook also participates in stopping the black king's escape on d7. Let's move on. Here we go. Again, we can see in this position that white has a powerful bishop on a3, pasting on the a3 f8 diagonal. Therefore, black is not allowed to castle. Also, if the black king could be attacked from the h5 e8 diagonal, obviously assuming that the f7 pawn would be gone, that could be a checkmate. And that's exactly what white is taking advantage of. White has a beautiful sacrifice at his disposal, and that's exactly what former world champion Alexander Alekhine did. Sacrificed his queen for just one pawn. If now black would block the check by queen e7, white would simply capture it, checkmate, as the bishop from a3 protects. On the other hand, if pawn captures queen, then voila, here we go, bishop g6. See how these two bishops beautifully work together, like clockwork. And finally, one more example. Here we go. This position has also happened in a real game a long, long time ago in 1865. It was Black's turn, and Black again has a beautiful way to end the game real quick with the very same pattern. Black can and should, and in fact did in the game, sacrifice the queen for the knight. Check. White has only one choice. Again, the beautiful cooperation between the black bishop, the black rook, and finally the other bishop coming in to h3. Checkmate. Well, I hope you learned something new and got familiar with the Bowden's mate. Good luck in using it in your own games and avoiding, of course, getting into your opponent's trap with the two bishops. Thank you for listening. So long until next time.